May I just first say I am really honoured and proud to be giving the inaugural Barney Gibbens Memorial Lecture. So great thrill for me. I'm now going to share my screen because I've got some slides that I will explain with you. The title of my lecture is Driverless Cars, but it really has three parts that I'd like to take you through. And one is the futuristic aspect of autonomous vehicles. What do people think? Will the technology work? So running through that and looking at some of the cultural aspects that people would need to adapt to embrace driverless cars. We then go into another use of technology, perhaps a more controversial use of technology, and looking at smart motorways where the hard shoulder has been taken up as a running lane, and looking at what we perceived at the AA is some of the problems with smart motorways and what our campaign has done to change things there. And then finally, and it all links up through technology, I would like to address how will we pay for roads in the future? If we're all driving electric vehicles or hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, the government won't be getting any revenue from fuel duty or vehicle excise duty. So how do we pay for that? So there's three distinctive parts, but technology runs through the middle of it. And obviously you are all technological experts. So let's start then on driverless cars. Now, a lot of the polling information that I talk about is from the AA Populace panel. We have a massive database of drivers, over 200,000 that we poll on a monthly basis. We use the pollsters Populace to take out our intrinsic bias. We've been running this panel since 2008, and it's the biggest dedicated motoring panel in Europe. Also, I have a little more insight into driverless cars as an advisor on one of the consortiums that's looking at pilots for driverless cars in Oxfordshire. But what I wanted to start with really is a more philosophical question about cars and culture. And what I want to question is whether our cultural attachment to the car is actually stronger than the technological one. I mean, over the years, there's been a very close cultural and social attachment to driving and cars. And there's a question of whether it may just slow down the kind of technological revolution. I mean, if I look at my own interest in arts, literature, theatre, I have certainly been greatly influenced by cars. My favourite novel is On the Road by Jack Kerouac, and driving that beaten up Chevy through California. And indeed, when I lived in California, I had that beaten up Chevy and drove through Mexico and everything. So that kind of cultural beatnik association with the car was there. My first car was a Mini. It cost £45. I sold it for £120, so made a bit of money. But maybe I was influenced by The Italian Job that came out in 1969, a really iconic movie where the car was king and could do everything. So that had an influence. One of my other favorite films is The Graduate. And there's no doubt, I've seen The Graduate many, many times. And the star of The Graduate to me is the red Alfa Spider. And I think that stuck with me for a long time. And when I lived in California, I actually was fortunate enough to do a deal on a car. And I didn't get the red Alfa Spider, but I got a red Fiat Spider, which may be second best, but it was a great car, great to drive. Now, the third car, the Porsche Boxster, unfortunately, I haven't quite risen to the heights to get that. I have had a old 911. But again, you know, the James Dean car was there. It was part of culture. And it's not just in films. If you look at the number of songs that are associated with cars, going back to the Beatles, Drive My Car, Corvette, Little Red Corvette by Prince, Gary Newman, Queen, the list is endless. And okay, those are all a bit dated, but we have more contemporary songs like Ed Sheeran's Castle in the Hill that actually has the line driving at 90 miles an hour down those country lanes, which caused a bit of fuss on Twitter with the Suffolk Constabulary perhaps questioning whether Ed should be driving at 90 miles an hour down the A140. But it was still out there as part of the culture. And even videos today, music videos today with Ed Sheeran and Stormzy feature cars, the Bentley 4x4, etc. So cars are still a strong part of our culture today. So if we go forward to autonomous cars, to driverless cars, will the car still be king? Will the car still be center? Now, if you look today, the way manufacturers market their cars, it is still the ad there, you see the joy of motoring with the latest Audi. Now, will that change when you're trying to market a driverless hub, as in the picture before? It will be quite a challenge to actually get that essence of the freedom of the road, going from a car that you control, perhaps the one that you don't control. So that will be a challenge. And I think the language in all of this really is key to what we're talking about. You know, there's a lot of talk about electric cars. When will electric cars just become cars and not electric cars? In our survey, almost 70% expect that by 2030, so in 10 years' time. So a lot of change is going to happen. So what do drivers think? You know, the car has more or less been the same for about 100 years, the way we drive it, mainly petrol cars, combustion engine, that's all changing. But what do drivers really think? Well, almost 3/4 say that they are familiar with the concept of autonomous cars. So they've heard about autonomous cars, they've read stuff in the press. And 61% can see real advantages, particularly for the elderly and disabled. One of the worst things for elderly drivers is when they have to hang up their keys. And my mother is a case in point. My mother's 87. She was a great driver, but had to hang up her keys probably about 4 years ago. And every time I talk to her and see her, she still says, you know, Edmund, I miss not having my car. I miss not having that freedom, the mobility. And sometimes it is a bit of a generational thing. You know, when we say, well, Mum, you could always use a taxi, it would cost you, you know, a fraction of what you paid for insurance, etc. That's not the same. The car was something more unique. So maybe in the future, who knows, there could be benefits for the elderly, the disabled, the young, if we had more autonomous cars. So those are some of the positives. But on the other side, we've got 87% are actually concerned that the programmers may have missed something out when they're actually designing the programs for these driverless cars. Having said that, almost 1/4 already say they would trust an autonomous car to drive itself. I mean, I've been in a couple of autonomous cars, pod type cars, and, you know, they vary. I went one in the United Nations complex in Geneva, and it looked a bit like the one there, the Great Britain one. We got into this driverless car, there was no driver, and it pulled off, and it's on a set route. But then a car did cut across, it stopped quite suddenly, and it didn't have seatbelts. So people fell forward. So, you know, in a way, this might be the future, but it's forgetting the safety element of the past. So we've got to build on the safety that we already know about. I think the important thing is, though, the technology is really important, can be really positive. And you don't always have to imagine autonomous vehicles as a fully autonomous vehicle. There are great technologies that will help us along the way. I mean, already drivers, 59% want adaptive cruise control. So this is the cruise control you can see in the picture on the bottom left that adapts your speed. You can set your speed to 65 miles an hour. If you get too close to the car in front, it will brake for you and keep that distance. Likewise, 58% want advanced emergency braking. So this is, if you're going towards a vehicle at speed, the car will read that there's a vehicle ahead and automatically stop you. And it is amazing technology. I've tested it on a test track at Thatcham, and I've been in a car and I've been told to drive at the car in front, and my right foot wanted to hit the brakes, and I was told, no, leave it, leave it, leave it. And luckily the car slowed down and avoided the vehicle in front. You had to have quite a lot of trust in it, but that's out there. 46% want lane keep assist. So this is the technology that actually keeps you in your lane, reads the white lines on the lane, and if you veer out, there are different versions of it. One can actually put you back into the lane, another can warn you that you're coming out. It works pretty well, and these first three technologies are already on quite a few state-of-the-art cars. The other one is something called intelligent speed assistance, and this is a system that reads all the traffic speeds on the road, so it has digital mapping with the traffic speeds, and it can automatically slow down your car. So if you're going from a 40 limit to a 30 limit, you can read those signs and automatically slow you down. It was interesting though, because in our survey, 2/3 thought there are times when humans know better the speed limit rather than electronic system in the car. And that can be a case. I drove a car with this ISA in London. It was a TfL car. And I remember at the bottom of the M1, at M1 Cross, joining the M1, and I was in the outside lane to join, going up the lane. And then the car I was in suddenly limited to 30 miles an hour because there was a 30 sign at the beginning of the slip road. I had a Saab on my inside thinking, what is this idiot doing at 30 miles an hour joining the M1 as he went on the inside? So, you know, there are times when that intelligence isn't quite as intelligent as it may appear. One of the other issues that always comes up is about the data. As cars become more sophisticated, we get more connected cars, we get semi-autonomous cars, autonomous cars. People think that we need more of a framework to protect consumers' rights and also their driving data. You know, if you've got a connected car that you've had for some time, that you put in your own personal data and then you sell that car, what happens to the data? Can you block that data? Can you stop other people getting hold of it? Others were also concerned about the possibility of hacking, cybersecurity, to access people's personal data. But perhaps more worrying was the 84% concerned about the possibility of hacking to actually interfere with the car. Maybe the car's braking. And there were some tests by ADAC in Germany, the equivalent of the German AA, that did actually show on various modern cars, they could hack into them and affect the braking system and other systems fairly easily. So there's still some way to go there in terms of the security. And certainly our panel members wanted to see more regulation around this. So what does this all mean? What do driverless cars mean to people? 8% say that they didn't really know what it meant, whereas a third actually thought it's a car with manual controls that's capable of taking them home to any destination in any weather without any human interference. Whereas 18% thought it was a car of taking over some aspects of driving, but then the driver has to switch in and out. And they're all actually right, because there are 5 levels, if you like, of automation. From level 1 having no automation to level 5 being that fully automated car that takes over. At the moment, you're getting some cars at around level 3, although in the United Kingdom, it's still not legal to use all of those facilities. It was interesting, though, that younger respondents were more likely to say that they would be comfortable with driverless cars than older respondents. 30% of 18 to 24-year-olds, as opposed to just 15% of those over 65. But I guess the other question has to come. You know, there's a lot of talk about this technology. There's quite a lot of hype about this technology. But what about the drivers? What about the consumers? What do they want? Are you ready to take your hands off the driving wheel? Are you ready to give up your car? I mean, it's a near miss. We got VAR here, almost but not quite. There's a lot of talk, but I think the jury's still out. And if we look at it, on the one side, you've still got 2/3 of people who actually say they would be totally lost without their private car. They want their own personal car. And that was more prevalent amongst women, 70%, than males. And some other research we've done on this actually showed a thing that we call car dependence. And we found, particularly sometimes with women, they wanted a car outside, not that they wanted to use it all the time, but if something went wrong, if Johnny was ill and needed to go to the hospital or the GP, it was reassuring to have that car outside. So that kind of car dependence. But also, cars in our life are pretty important. If you look, for most people, the car is the second most expensive thing you'll buy in your life after your house. 20% have even given their car a name. It's become part of the family for some people. There were geographical differences. Londoners, perhaps unsurprisingly, were more likely to think a time would come where they might not need to own a vehicle. And obviously, if you live in Islington, where you've got buses, you've got the tube, where it's difficult to park, where you've got congestion charging, where there are parking problems, you can understand that. But if you get out to other areas of the country, you know, to Derby, to Doncaster, to Darlington, the views are quite different. And actually 45% say they would never contemplate ever giving up their car. So that attachment is still quite deep. One of the other things we looked at was the kind of ethics of driverless cars. And there was this hypothesis around the trolley problem in 1976, when there were a number of thought experiments in ethics and psychology. And there's this dilemma whether you would sacrifice your own life to save others. And one of the theories talks about the bystander and the switch. And basically, there's a runaway trolley train. It's going down the track. There are 5 people at the end of the track that are tied up. You've got a choice. You can pull a lever to move the trolley off to the left, but there might be some other people there. What would you do? And this has always been one of those dilemmas. And when it comes to driverless cars, there are various potential scenarios. In one, you're driving along, you see a group of people in the road. Does the autonomous car, if it can't stop, does it swerve off to the right where the driver may be injured or killed, or does it continue and plow into those people? Likewise, in scenario B, there's one person ahead, but there's one person to the right. How do you choose what to do? How does the car intervene? And in the third scenario, there's a passenger in the car as well. So it's not just the driver's ethics, it's also of the passenger. So there are still these kind of philosophical or ethical questions that perhaps need to be solved. So what about the future? Now, technology is really important. This is something that should appeal to this audience. Technology isn't a prison. Technology shouldn't stop us. We should embrace technology. And certainly with driverless cars, a lot of that technology is really important for the future. Having said that, there really are some doubters out there who talk about the hype and are we doing it technology for technology's sake when it comes to driverless cars. So one is Christian Woolmer, who used to be the transport correspondent for The Independent. He writes a lot, mainly about railways, but he wrote this book, The Driverless Car Conundrum, in 2018. And he says there's a myriad of problems ranging from insurance issues, how to address potential conflicts between driverless and conventional cars, to the limitations of their technology, and also the resistance of the public to travel in them. And he says as more research is conducted, there will be lots of Donald Rumsfeld's famous unknown unknowns. And Christian's actually updated that book, and I've seen a manuscript of it, and his new book, The Road to Nowhere, actually comes out at the end of September. And I think it is right to have people at least questioning this technology, to get out of this kind of groupthink that perhaps there has been in this rush to always find technological solutions. So, I don't agree with everything Christian Woolmer's saying, but there are certainly some questions that he addresses. And there are other people, Andrew English, who is the motoring correspondent for The Telegraph and has been for years, great writer. He also has some severe reservations about some of the technological aspects. And then what about the enjoyment? What about the enjoyment of the car? 2/3 of people still enjoy driving. And, I've got to say, generally, I'm one of those. Having said that, 12% of our members say they can't wait to take their hands off the wheel and jump into a driverless car. And interestingly, that sentiment is slightly higher amongst the younger drivers than it is amongst the older drivers. And also, people believe the technology is coming. So 10% believe level 3 will be here within the next 2 years. Well, to be honest, parts of level 3 already are here. It's just we can't always use it. Level 5, which is the fully driverless car, just 3% think it will be here in that timescale. So I think they're right. But enjoyment is still quite important. I mean, would you enjoy driving this car? This is the Porsche Taycan. It's a fully electric car. And I've actually put this up because Porsche delivered one of these to me today. So I've actually got one of these outside here. Unfortunately, only for a week to test drive it. But I took it out today, and man, is this an amazing car. Very expensive car, the Turbo Sport. How you can have an electric turbo beats me, but it's called a Turbo Sport, is the one I've got outside with a list price of £151,000. But I drove it a little bit today, and it did bring a smile to the face. So for many people still enjoy driving. So in terms of driverless cars, well, the world is changing. The car's been the same for 100 years, but the next decade will see massive change, both in terms of electrification, connectivity, and then more technological change. And the technological advances can, and indeed will, save lives. I mean, driver error is a factor in about 89% of crashes. So if you can eliminate some of that driver error, then it can add to safety. And there could be advantages, as we've said, for the elderly, disabled, and the young. And the government are actually pretty hot on some of this stuff. Just a few weeks ago, they've launched a consultation on automated lane keeping system, which is a fairly radical system. And what it does, it kind of combines two systems that we talked about before: lane assist that keeps you in a lane, and then also the system that keeps you at a safe distance from the car in front. And this combines the two of these systems, and potentially, when you've got it running, you could take your hands off the wheel and do other things like read a book. Now, the United Nations regulations on this talk about doing it at a maximum of 37 miles an hour. And they call it a kind of chauffeur assist. So those times when you're on the M25 in stop-start traffic, you're getting a bit bored, you could put on this system. It would keep you in lane. It would keep you at a distance from the car in front. Interestingly, the DFT consultation are talking about it in speeds up to 70 miles an hour, which really is quite radical and quite different. But the government are being fairly gung-ho on some of this stuff, and they want the UK to be a leader in it. So it'll be interesting to see how that consultation actually flags out. But also there is the question, how reliable is the technology in real life? We've seen some fatal crashes with cars that have been on autonomous modes in the United States and America. In 2016, there was one on an autonomous mode, and it misread the trailer of a truck ahead and plowed into it. There's been another one, a lady crossing the road pushing a cycle. The autonomous car didn't really read the cycle or thought it was some kind of signage and plowed into it. So there still are many questions there. So I guess, you know, the question will be the Beatles lyric, "Baby, you can drive my car." How relevant will that be in the future? And I think we just have to wait and see. So that's my first section, which perhaps is slightly more futuristic. I'm now going to segue into something slightly different, but that's got a technological edge, just to talk a little bit about smart motorways. So smart motorways are motorways where the hard shoulder is used as a running lane, either permanently or when the road is busy. And this is some of the press coverage that came up from a campaign at the AA we've been running over the last few years on smart motorways. Now, just a quick bit of history. The first managed motorway was actually introduced on the M42 in 2006. And the reason it was introduced was because the M42 was really congested. Can we use another lane, the hard shoulder lane, to reduce congestion? And it had emergency refuge areas or lay-bys to you and I every about 500 meters. It also had the overhead gantries with warning signs, whether you could use the inside lane or not, whether there was obstacle ahead. And the M42 managed motorway actually worked pretty well. We said it worked pretty well because it had all those safeguards. What then happened over the subsequent years is that smart motorways were then rolled out on bits of the M1, the M6, the M3, etc. But rather than having these emergency refuge areas every 500 meters, it went to every 2,500 meters, or indeed every mile and a half. And from the outset, we pointed out that this was not safe. If you break down in a live lane, your life is at risk. If you've got to drive a mile and a half to find a lay-by, many more vehicles will break down. So we've conducted a lot of polling of AA members. We put in lots of freedom of information requests about what was happening with the development of smart motorways. We looked at all the historic data. We looked at all the safety data. And we actually found out that 38% of breakdowns on smart motorways happened in live lanes. So that's cars breaking down in a live lane. We also found that on average, it took 17 minutes for a car to be spotted in that live lane by Highways England. So that's 17 minutes you're sitting there hoping and praying that you won't be hit. We also found that near misses increased about 20-fold on the section of the M25 when it was converted to a smart motorway. And more worryingly, we found 38 deaths that were attributed or could be attributed to the lack of a hard shoulder or a safe haven. The select committee looked at this. We gave evidence to that. We worked with the media and politicians to increase exposure. And one of the things, the letter on the right there to the Times, I managed to get 5 ex-transport ministers, cross-party or Lib Dem, Labour, a couple of Tory ministers, to write to the Times raising concerns about it. We had various BBC programs. We had a BBC Inside Out program that led to about 120 media interviews. We worked with some people whose relatives had been killed on smart motorways, and also worked very closely with the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps. And I must say, I'd been campaigning on this over 10 years, and I worked out I had met 12 ministers or transport secretaries over that time, and most of them weren't interested. They are not dangerous. They're totally safe. Basically, go away. And Grant Shapps, to his credit, was the first one who actually listened, and I think understood some of the concerns that we were raising. So he instigated a full stock take into smart motorways, and we were delighted because this was the first minister who took it serious. Then a general election was called, which was a bit of a pain, to be honest, because we'd worked so hard to get to be listened to on this subject. And with a general election, who's going to form the next government? Will it be a different transport secretary? As it transpired, Grant Shapps was returned. But in that period between the general election and a new government being formed and coming back in, we wanted to keep the pressure up on smart motorways. So we kind of thought, well, what would be the one thing to keep the pressure up, to keep their interest there? And we thought, well, a panorama program will really help. So I spoke to a producer friend of mine, basically pitched what we could do for a panorama program, and worked incredibly. The BBC commissioned it, and we worked very closely with them. We got together a lot of dash cam footage on smart motorways. I got quite a bit on my car going up and down motorways, going to football matches, and picked it up. We got interviews with patrols. We did lots of research, and that actually went out and was pretty effective. And I'm going to try and show you how effective it was just in a very short video. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen so that Steve can put up the video. And just a warning, some of the video, it actually is quite daunting. What that campaign actually showed, and ultimately we did get the Transport Secretary to agree to 18 points to change it. And the main point that we'd campaigned for was to double the number of emergency refuge areas from every 1.5 miles to every 3/4 mile. The good news is that that has happened, and Highways England are starting to implement that. I had a call with them just 2 days ago, and a lot of progress is being made. So it does show that with campaigns, they can be effective. You can change government policy if you stick at it. So finally, and I am aware of time, so I won't take long on this, but just the other element I wanted just to touch on was this whole question of, if we change to fully electric cars, hydrogen fuel cell cars, the government's indicated by 2035 that combustion engine new cars should not be sold. If we do that, how will we pay for roads? Well, a few years ago, there was a Wolfson Economics Prize that posed this question. And so I decided to enter with my wife, Deirdre, as she is a transport economist. So she could do all the figures and all the work on that side, whereas I could do some of the ideas stuff. What we came up with was a concept that we call road miles: better, fairer, greener, safer. And that was the question that was posed. How will we pay for our roads in the future? Well, in our system, it actually works out that drivers pay less, more spent on roads, tunnels, cycling, buses, and actually the government gets more. Currently, you could say drivers get a raw deal. We pay some of the highest taxes in Europe, and yet, often we've got a kind of pothole, congested road network. In road miles, how it works is every driver would be given 3,000 free miles. So you would not pay to drive those miles. If you live in a rural area, and people in rural areas tend to drive a third more, you get 1,000 extra road miles. And we'd also give discounts for the elderly, disabled, and younger drivers. Now, the technological bit, it can work in different ways in a transition period, but there's a fairly simple dongle. The AA, we developed one called Car Genie, which plugs into the onboard diagnostic system. It can tell where you're driving, when you're driving, how much you're driving. It can tell if you've pulled that dongle out. So it can monitor your miles, it could monitor your road miles. And also another advantage of it, it can actually, in quite a few instances, predict and prevent a breakdown. We've had people on holiday in Menorca, left their car in Liverpool airport. They got an alert saying their battery had gone flat because our dongle picked it up. We were able to sort out the problem before they got home. So that technology is there, and it works. We actually polled drivers on the concept of road miles, and it was chosen as the most popular way of paying for road use. If you actually say to drivers, should you pay as you go, like you do on the mobile phone, people half of people agree with pay as you go, but the sticking point is people don't trust the government to deliver a fair system. You know, it's been referred to, or road pricing as it's called, has been referred to as a poll tax on wheels. And there are things like the Dartford Bridge. When it was built, we were told that when the debts were paid off, when money went into a fund to pay for maintenance, the tolls would be dropped. Surprise, surprise, that never happened. So that trust of government wasn't there. In 2007, 1.8 million people signed an anti-road pricing petition. And, you know, even way back in 2007, I think I was talking about this, saying you can't have road pricing per se unless it's overseen by an independent body, unless there's a guarantee that there'll be other tax reductions. And road miles actually delivers all of that. And it's important, the semantics here about road miles is important. We never ever call it road pricing. You know, road pricing has been a theory since the Smead report in 1964, and it's always been 10 years away. It's difficult to sell road pricing. Who wants to buy road pricing? It is a tax. So it's quite important in our submission that we don't call it road pricing, we call it road miles. One of the ways we could reduce tax that drivers pay and increase spending for the government is that we introduce some other elements. We actually talked about having a road miles lottery like the National Lottery, whereby perhaps you could win a Tesla electric car or a Porsche electric car, etc. So getting more money in through a lottery. We also talked about a kind of adopt a highway scheme. There's an adopt a highway scheme in the United States. I've talked to the people in depth who set it up there. And their scheme is whereby you can get businesses to adopt part of the 405 freeway. Disney in LA adopted that highway. And by adopting it, they put some money in to keep it clean, to clean up the litter, and to have naming rights over that. So that was something we floated here. Somewhat tongue-in-cheek, could you have the Manchester United M6? Perhaps not great for Man City fans, but it was still a way of bringing in money. And some of the ideas that we were raising in road miles got picked up by the Times and indeed by politicians. In this article here, Liz Truss, who at the time was Treasury Minister, is actually quoted as saying, "My new vision is all about the roads. We need to push to get company sponsorship of the top 10 motorways like they have in the USA. We'll wait until the new year though, because obviously now everything is consumed by Brexit." Now, obviously from Brexit, we've gone to COVID, but I think the idea is still there. So it was interesting that government ministers were looking at that idea that we had floated in the road miles scenario. So, I mean, when we came to road miles, what we were basically saying is one of the best definitions of politics is who gets what, when, where, and how. It's all about resources. But when politicians try to change some things that are fully ingrained in us, like free access to the road network, it is very difficult to change that. So you need some more imaginative thinking. And as I say, that's probably why road pricing is still 10 miles off. Whereas we thought that road miles is different, it could be popular, and the government needs some fresh thinking. Now, we did pretty well in the prize. The top prize was £250,000. Somewhat frustratingly, we missed it by a very small margin. We came second. We were pleased to receive this award, and I think we did win a cheque for £10,000, which paid for the family to have a very nice trip to Mexico. But we still think the concept of road miles is a good concept. So we continue to talk to government to change it. So I think I've taken up more than my time. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for listening. And I am happy to take any questions.